there, my friends. It's July 16th. We're halfway through July, which means we're more than halfway through 2020, which I'm sure will be welcome news to pretty much everyone who has lived through 2020. So I want to talk today about being a truly great, empathetic tarot reader. And as I always do in these uncertain times, I'm going to ask you to take a journey with me and just to stay with me and to lean in when things feel uncomfortable and to just, again, like just walk this path with me for a little bit, okay? I know, take this walk with me. I want to talk about being an empathetic tarot reader, and I want to talk about it in context of 2020. And we talk a lot about empathy in tarot. We talk a lot about being an empath, and I'm not going to get into sort of the difference or being an empath, but what I want to talk about is what it means to be empathetic today in ways that it didn't mean it before, I think, or it should have but hasn't. I posted a message on my community page a week or so, maybe 2 weeks ago, about how if you want to be a truly great tarot reader, you have to be actively anti-racist, or you have to be anti-racist. Get a little bit of backlash for that, mostly a lot of support. But in my usual way, when I write, I just like feel myself and I'm like putting this message out there. I want to talk about what that means and why, because I really want folks to live with this concept. So here we go. I'm going to explain what I meant. I'm going to elaborate on what I meant, and I'm going to make an invitation for you, especially if you resist this message, to take another step, to move toward true empathy as a diviner. Because I think that in this sort of New Age adjacent community and world, whatever we are, we talk a lot about self-empowerment, and we talk a lot about peace and making the world better, and at the same time, we don't necessarily do that as we do that a lot for ourselves, maybe, and not as actively for the world at large. The thing that I want to talk about really is that I said you can't be a truly great tarot reader if you're not actively anti-racist, and that you can't separate tarot reading from the term I used that night was social justice, which is a loaded term, but from social progress is maybe a better one. And the reason that I really, really believe that is because if we aren't capable and willing and ready to face the world as it is, we are living in a bubble, and our readings will reflect that. Let me give you an example that might be a little frustrating for folks, but it's a really clear one because it's a popular movement in tarot and divination in general, which is, again, this concept of self-empowerment. A lot of us get into tarot because we want to empower ourselves. We want to be more actively engaged in our lives. We want to stop being done to, and we want to do, and that's why I got into it, and that's great. And that's why people want tarot readings. I mean, we want more agency in our lives. The reality of the world, though, whether or not we as white people want to, and I'm speaking obviously specifically to white people here, is that whether we want to face it or admit it or look at it, the world is not an even playing field. And while we don't grow up with anything being easy, certain groups of people have less obstacles in front of them, which means that self-empowerment is a little bit easier. If you have money, if you have advanced education, if you have a support system, if you have parents who are actively engaged in your life, if you don't have mental health or physical health or disabilities, things are easier because the world is built for you. Let's just look at ability for a second, right? The world has had to be retrofitted for people who can't walk, or who walk with difficulty. The world wasn't created with ramps. The world wasn't built to be ADA accessible. The world was built for people who walk the way that most people walk. We have had to retrofit the world to make space for wheelchairs. So this is what I'm talking about when I talk about like the institutions and the changes we have to make to institutions. Like, does that help make sense? You know what I mean? Like, the world was built by abled people for abled people, and disabled people were an afterthought. And it took regulation and governments and organizations and activists to step in and say, hey, a person in a wheelchair or on crutches should be able to go to the theater too. You need an elevator. You know what I mean? That's one example of institutional bias, right? And it's one we don't even think about, because now when we look at the world, we see ramps and elevators and ADA accessible and ADA parking spots, and it's just become second nature to us. We don't remember, or maybe we do if we are in a wheelchair, that there was a time where that wasn't the case. It has become part of the way we do things. And that is only because activists and disabled representatives and governments and groups stepped in and made a change. It doesn't mean that discrimination against differently abled people is solved, but that's just one example of how changes need to happen that abled people didn't see until they were forced to reckon with it by the people who were like, hey, I want to go to the fucking theater. Hey, I want to stay in a hotel, and I shouldn't need a team of people to carry me up the stairs. I should be able to do it myself because I'm a grown-ass adult. If you apply that to race, to things we just don't think about every day because we don't face those obstacles, it's a little bit easier to start understanding what we mean when we talk about institutional bias and institutional racism and discrimination against people of color, against indigenous people, against queer people even. Against any group that faces obstacles that maybe we didn't, because the world was built for us and we have never needed a ramp until one day when we do, and we're like, oh shit, like how hard has it been for people, to navigate the world without ramps and elevators and accessible vehicles and chairlifts on buses, so the world is more accessible now than it was because people took action and people recognized and were made to see that there were obstacles in the face of people who in wheelchairs, for example. The thing that we have to reconcile in the world is that is true even for things we don't necessarily see. A lot of us were raised to not see color. And what that does is it erases the experiences of people of color. Because while it's not a matter of entering a building or getting up to the 39th floor, it is that there is still discrimination built in that we can't see. It's actually harder for us to see than someone struggling to get up a staircase in a wheelchair, and that makes it harder for us to face. But we cannot truly see the world accurately until we come face to face with those discriminations. They exist whether or not we want to think about them or see them. They just are. That's just, it's just a fact. And facts are facts. They just are. And so to get back to tarot, right? So let's say you are a person in a wheelchair who comes to me, and I apologize if this is offensive to anyone who is disabled in any way. I just want to highlight a way in which people recognized a discrimination and work together to change it for the better. If you come to me and you're in a wheelchair and you say, my landlord won't put in a ramp so that I can get to my apartment, what do I do? And I draw the High Priestess and I say, you've got the power inside you. You just have to manifest that destiny. You're self-empowered. You've got it within you to do it. Just do it. That's an oversimplification, right? And I hope no one would actually give a reading that way. But it negates the reality of this person's life. They actually don't have the power within them because they have tried to get their landlord to do the right thing and their landlord hasn't, and now they're coming to you to say, how do I solve this equation? I have tried to figure this out and I can't. What can you tell me? And by saying you've got the power inside you the whole time, you're negating their experience. You're negating their reality. And that would be the same if someone can't get a loan because their name isn't white passing, for example. It would be the same if someone couldn't get housing or a job because they were trans. It would be the same if someone kept having their neighbors call the cops on them when they go into their apartment because they're black in a majority white building. You know, by saying you have the power inside you the whole time is negating their reality. It's negating the fact that we don't always have an easy time with things, that there are obstacles that we as white people don't generally face. And so I really, 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 really believe that if we want to be great readers, we have to understand how we're not on an even playing field in life, and that we need to recognize that like a fundamentalist self-empowerment is not helpful, and is in fact another form of discrimination because it ignores someone's reality. Now, I'm not advocating for you to go into a reading and say, the High Priestess is a gatekeeper. She represents institutional racism. I mean, I've never thought about that interpretation before, and that actually may well be, but I would be cautious about making assumptions. You know, if you're engaged in a reading about institutional bias and discrimination, yes, but what I'm asking for is not for you to go in and be a white savior and make every reading about racism or discrimination. What I'm asking you to do is to face the world and to face yourself and face our own biases and face our experiences and face the realities that the world we live in is not easy for everybody, and that just knowing that, just having that in you, will make you a more empathetic reader, because when you lay out the cards, it's less about having the power inside you the whole time, and it's more about navigating a very complex world that we live in. And if we refuse to see discrimination, if we refuse to look at the world the way it really is, our readings are skewed towards our own experience, towards our own comforts, and we're likely to oversimplify and make things seem easier than maybe they are. People often accuse me of victimizing people of color when I talk this way. That somehow I'm taking away their power and saying that they aren't strong enough to overcome these obstacles. And that's garbage. The point is not whether or not they are powerful and have agency. If you have grown up facing obstacles, you are more powerful and more resilient than people who haven't. Which is why when I talk about this stuff, people cry, and say, why are you so mean to me? Because they haven't had to face this before. Where when I talk about this stuff, and even when I fuck up and people of color talk to me, they're not like, they're like, hey, you said this stupid thing. Or like, hey, that's true. You know what I mean? Like, you are more resilient if you have faced obstacles than if you haven't. And that doesn't mean you've never faced obstacles. See, when I talk about this stuff and you start feeling like, but that's the defensiveness that you have to start to break away from in order to see the world the way it is. You know what I mean? Like, don't defend. I'm not attacking you. I'm not saying you're a bad person. I'm not saying you haven't had struggles. I'm not saying that it's been easy. I'm not saying that everyone experiences the same. I'm saying that to be a great reader, we have to accept the world the way it is. We have to see the world the way it is and recognize that racism is real, that we have internalized biases, that we have institutional discriminations that can be changed. As we saw when we talked about the ramps and the elevators and ADA, and I'm speaking specifically, of course, to America, but this has happened in most of the world, we have made it more accessible for people in wheelchairs. Again, the problem isn't solved. There's discrimination, and, just because there's an elevator doesn't mean it's a comfortable working environment for someone who's differently abled. That doesn't mean that's true, but it means they can get there. We saw an issue and we made a change as a society because we recognized that something was wrong. And you can't do that until you recognize something is wrong. So I believe that we as tarot readers, as diviners, have a responsibility to do anti-racist exploration and work. Because unless we are doing that, unless we are engaging the world the way it really is, we are giving biased readings. And we're giving readings biased to our own experience and to our own comforts. We are focused on our own struggles and the obstacles we have had to face and the way we have navigated our lives as white or centered people. And to really, truly give great readings to others It requires a view of ourselves and the world that reflects reality. Many, many anti-racist writers are careful to point out that there is a difference between racist ideas, racist policies, and being a good or a bad person. We tend to think of racism as the KKK and white supremacist organizations. We, in many ways, are indoctrinated to think that in life, to let ourselves off the hook. I don't know whether it's a conscious decision or not that our history books teach racism as the KKK. And that it ended with the signing of the Civil Rights Act. It probably is mostly unconscious so that we can just pretend everything's fine and we don't have to do any work, but we do have to do the work. All you have to do is turn on the news. All you have to do is see the pain. You know, it's out there. It's real. People are suffering, and we can change that. And we can do it in a small way by exploring our own biases so that our readings are less biased towards our white-centeredness and our own unearned advantages. And then we can take that into the world. We can march, if that's what you can do. We can donate, if that's what you can do. You know, I'm not a marcher. I have mental health struggles, right? I have anxiety and depression, and going out to crowds in the middle of a pandemic is not something that I can conceivably do right now. What I could do, and it was a small thing, but what I could do was take a out-of-print tarot deck that I really loved and just sacrifice it, make an auction of it, and say, here's money that I can offer to an organization. That is such a tiny thing. Like, I'm not patting myself on the back. I'm just saying that that was a small act that I could take because I couldn't go to a protest. You know, we can start doing that work, and we can start speaking bravely about the reality of these things and stop worrying about the fact that we're going to lose subscribers or that people are going to get pissed at us or we're going to fuck up. We are going to fuck up because we have been taught so much wrong stuff. You know, I say wrong shit all the time, and I'm lucky that I have people in my life who are like, hey, that's fucked up. You know, I'm lucky for that. It doesn't feel good because I want to be right. I want to be a good white person. I want to be a good ally. But being a good ally means listening when we fuck up. And it means opening ourselves up to the world. So we start by doing the work here and seeing the world. And then once you know the world, once you really see it, you can't unknow it. And it's hard to be passive at that point. It's hard to not make donations or to call Breonna Taylor's murderer's boss. It's hard to not engage once you see the world the way it really is. And so by taking the small step as a tarot reader and saying, okay, I want to understand the world better so that my readings are less biased, you crack open the whole sky and you're like, I can't sit by. I'm going to do what I can do right now. And that's how it starts. That's how ramps and elevators got installed. Was enough people said, we need accessible buildings, you know? I know that it seems like I'm pushing an agenda here, but I literally do not believe that you can be a good tarot reader unless you are engaged in the world. And part of being engaged in the world is recognizing the way it treats people of color, the way it treats disabled people, the way it treats queer people, the way it treats indigenous people, the way it treats anyone marginalized. And I'm not negating feminists right now, that the way it treats women. But what's happening in the world right now is that white people are finally seeing, we are finally seeing the realities that we haven't had to deal with and watch and look at. And I don't know how you can look at the news and say all lives matter when that's not true in the world. You know, it's just, I mean, if only that were true. But it's not. Look at the news. You know, look at Breonna Taylor. Look at Sandra Bland. You know, and George Floyd. And to me, I mean, just when you say all lives matter, you're negating the fact that they don't matter to the institutions. And right now, we're centering people who have been treated as if they don't matter for generations. And a small step is saying, okay, I want to give less white-centered readings. As stupid as that sounds, I know it sounds stupid. I want to give less biased readings less let's say it this way, readings less influenced by my unearned advantages that reflect the reality of the world and how it is not easy for everyone. And once you start to do that, once you start to look at the world, you really can't go back. So I want to recommend, because we as tarot folks and New Age adjacent folks love ritual, and we love workshops, and we love classes, and we love workbooks. Layla Saad wrote Me and White Supremacy, Combat Racism, Change the World, and Become a Good Ancestor. It's a 28-day workbook. It's the cost of a tarot deck. It's like $25. You can get it in an ebook. You can get it as a print book everywhere books are sold. And it's a private, safe opportunity for you to do work, just to start to see these things. Just as, and there's no one's going to be calling you out. You don't post this on Instagram. You know what I mean? It's not a tarot challenge. It's a personal exploration. And no one is going to yell at you for being a bad person. No one is going to say you're an asshole. No one is going to attack you. No one, like Tom Benjamin, is going to come along and be a self-righteous, lefty. None of that's going to happen, because it's just you and the paper. And so take that journey now. You know what I mean? If you've gotten this far in the video, you're either doing the work already and you're just here to see what I'm going to say, or you're waiting to tell me I'm an asshole and I'm wrong, or you're ready. So look up Layla Saad's book, Me and White Supremacy, Combat Racism, Change the World, Become a Good Ancestor. Buy it from a bookstore by a black-owned business person. Don't go to Amazon to do it. And if you're ready to, Stamped from the Beginning by Ibram X. Kendi is a big... I'm only halfway through it, but I'll tell you, an eighth of the way through it, your mind is going to be blown by how racism has shaped the United States. I used to say that racism was woven into the fabric of the United States. And being halfway through this book, I'm only up to about the Civil War, I see that racism is the fabric of the United States. And we need to weave something new. We just have to. And we can take little steps, like saying, I'm going to be a tarot reader that is less biased by my own privilege. And I'm going to read and engage Layla Saad's book for 28 days. 28 days. You can do that. We do it on Instagram all the time. So just continue this journey. What I'm trying to do, what I want to say again, and I hope I said this at the beginning, I meant to, I'm not good at this. I'm just sharing with you what I've learned, and I've been doing it for a little bit longer. And I'm not letting myself off the hook. I'm just saying, I'm not coming at you like I know better because I was born this way. I was, like I said in my language video, I was an I don't see color lefty for most of my life. I just happened to get smacked in the face by the reality, and I couldn't unsee it after a certain point, and I had to engage this, and once you do, you will too. I'm not better than you, I promise. I am a arrogant, bitchy, angry person, and that will come through in the way that I communicate. But I am also deeply passionate about this, and I am also someone who wants to share my own fucked upiosity so that you can get through yours more quickly. I mean, kind of the whole purpose behind my channel is to share lessons with you that I wish I'd learned sooner. I know I have a video called that, but really everything that I share with you is something, God, I wish I had known that, and I just stumbled on it. So just keep this up. 28 days with Layla Saad's book, you can do that easily. So do it and start becoming a better reader because you're willing to see the world. Just because you're willing to face reality and recognize that we have unearned advantages and that some things are easier for us because we don't face obstacles that other people do. Start there, and once you do that, and once, again, please do not become a white savior reader. Do not go into readings and say, racism, just come on, don't do that, please. But do the work in here, and it will change the way you look at here, and that will make you a better reader. It will also make you more likely to become anti-racist and to actively engage and to evangelize, which is what we need to do. We need to make change. And it's possible. That's why I shared the wheelchair example. It's not perfect, but it was an example of how people made a movement that made life better in some ways for people who had obstacles placed in front of them by people who never thought about those obstacles. So I'm going to stop now. Stay well, wear your mask, and for all the bitchy arrogance that I put out here, just know that if I didn't give a shit about you, I wouldn't make these videos. This comes from love, believe it or not. So take care.